So, the first question I have for all of you is that Oregon once again completed a successful session and special session, cutting PERS liabilities, increased revenue for schools, and cut taxes for small business. Yet you all come from different parties, different political philosophies, so it was very unusual to have accomplished so much given that. So we're going to start with you, President Courtney. Tell us, why and how did it happen here in Oregon?
Why you have what?
And so it begins.
What?
Why and how did it happen here that you had such a successful session?
Okay. My name is Peter Courtney, and I'm a state senator. I represent District 11. I don't know if you care. That includes portions of Salem, Jervis, and Woodburn. Also, I just came from the eye doctor. My eyes are dilated. I can't see any of you, and I don't even know what's in front of me. My staff has given me size 100 print. So some there with the sunglasses and with Ted Ferrioli, I hope I can do something worthwhile here today. Also, I bought a rose just for this event. That should mean something to you. I got a rose. Yeah. That was not much of a clap, but I'll take it. Well, I'm just going to say, I have 15 reasons I've identified why we did what we did, but I'm not going to mention most of them because it's not fair to my fellow who needs to speak. I'm just going to mention two. First of all, you don't ever do what they did on the agenda here. I noticed here in describing Senator Ted Ferrioli and Senator Mike McLane, they call them minority leaders. I do not like at all the phrase minority leader in the Oregon legislature. I'm well aware there's more Democrats and Republicans, but they're the Republican leaders, they're not the minority. And the one thing I said going into these negotiations, is we're all equal. So we're all equal here, and we're all equal in the legislature. Even a person whose numbers aren't as great can be a majority on a given day, given their philosophies and procedures. And I think one of the tragedies that happens so many times in this business is where you're in the minority, where you're in the majority. So I don't like the word minority whatsoever, and at no time when we were involved in this situation did we look at each other as anything but total equals. The next thing, and then I'll stop, is somewhere I have to get to Ted Ferrioli or Mike McLane or Tina Kotek before they get there in terms of their emotions and needs. If I can anticipate them and think about them and want to help them, then we got a shot to save the world. And if you could have been involved in these negotiations, and I'm not a psychiatrist, at any given time you could see it happening to 1, 2, 3, or 4 of us. And so those are the things that are very important. We saw each other as equals, and we talked about it going in because we realized we had the DR thing, the House Senate thing, the governor thing, the whole bit. And number two, I did see the magic, and I've been in the legislature so long, I got here in 1901, that I have been involved in a lot of negotiations. I've been involved in 18 special sessions out of Ordinance 36, and I've been in those that have been terrible. But it seems to me the magic happens, and I have to call it that. The mystery's there if I can sort of anticipate Ted and Mike. And I won't give you an example of Mike. I may later on. It was a very emotional situation where he said, "Can you?" And he didn't even have to finish the sentence. So I'm just going to speak for those two things. I have many more, but then I'd like to give it up to my colleagues so they get a shot.
Thank you. Senator Ferrioli.
Well, thank you. It's really great to be here in Portland as the Senate Minority Leader, and great to see you all here today. As I walked through the tables to get to the dais here today, a number of people shouted out, "Break a leg!" They really meant it. You know, I could suggest that locking us all in Mahonia Hall for days on end resulted in a variant of the Stockholm Syndrome, where people who are captured, who can't leave, eventually develop an affinity for each other. That sounds pretty funny, but actually it's not far from the truth. But you have to realize that the group of people that was asked to come together on some very diverse issues, PERS liability reductions, more money for schools, small business tax reduction, had also had the unique experience of successfully negotiating state redistricting. And if that wasn't a neat enough trick to negotiate a federal redistricting plan, where that had not been done in Oregon for a century, And you also have to realize that even though we regard it as pretty mundane, arriving at a budget session after session is not easy, and it requires a lot of negotiation. And the team that negotiated on the grand bargain know each other very well. And I think that it comes down to trust. The interesting thing, though, also is that for two reasons, and I guess you could characterize that as fear and suspicion, or you could say that it was vote counts and political cover. But we really needed each other to come to closure on these agreements. Some folks don't have a problem with raising revenue. Others see that as antithetical. Some folks don't have a problem with reducing taxes on businesses. You know, that there's a hydraulic between our political philosophies. At some point in time, we realized that to get the work done, we were going to have to suspend our disbelief of each other and invest a little trust in each other, and really recognize that without all of us being all in on the whole package, none of it would come together. And I want to tell you that today, I was mentioning this to my colleague, it feels a little different knowing that Oregon's unfunded liability is significantly reduced than it was. 11 billion feels better than 19, and it's having an effect in our communities and in our society that, although not without pain and suffering, is a significant step forward. So I just wanted to say that I believe that what we did together we'll be asked to do again. We've got good success, we've got good experience at it, and I hope this partnership and the ability for us to reach across continues, because it does stand in stark contrast to what we see in other places in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Kotek.
Thank you, Malia. It's nice to be here. Hi, everyone. You know, the Oregon legislature delivered for the people of Oregon this year. It's been a very interesting year, my first year as speaker, and I think we've accomplished a great deal for the state. If you look at the historic investments in our K-12 system, you look at the investments in higher education and the flexibility we've given to local governance boards. If you look at the close to $1 billion in public bonding that we allocated, so we could put people back to work and build our infrastructure across the state, whether it was roads or community college campuses or water projects, we knew we needed to put people back to work, and we delivered. We even did things that were even perhaps tougher than even those types of things, public safety reform, making sure that we're not going to have to build a new prison and open a new prison over the next 5 years, so we can invest in education. So I believe all of us here come to do our work. We are representing our individual communities, and when people ask me, well, how could you be successful, the question of why we were successful, particularly in the special session, first of all, I want a little bit of sympathy for me having to spend hours in Mahonia Hall with these three guys. I'm the straight lady in the room, and that takes a lot of work on my end. These guys are very funny, and it makes for a very long day. However, we're all here to do a job, and I think the reason we succeeded was, first and foremost, we listened to each other. We really listened to each other. We didn't agree on everything, but we listened. We also set priorities. We knew we needed to fund education. We knew we had to help the tax system work better for businesses, but also provide additional resources for mental health and senior services and for education, and we did that. So we made very clear priorities. And lastly, we made very tough choices. Not one of us at this table liked all the choices we made or all the decisions we made, but we made tough choices, and we delivered for the state. Because ultimately, the issues we all care about are not partisan issues, education and jobs. There are certainly partisan solutions to solving those problems, but the issues themselves are nonpartisan. So we listened, we prioritized, and we compromised and made some good choices, tough choices for the state of Oregon.
Thank you. Representative McLane.
Thank you. I'm Mike McLane. I represent House District 55. And Malia, thank you for hosting again, and thanks for the invitation. And I appreciate the subtlety of when it's time to quit talking. And House Republicans, we usually have Wayne Krieger in the back yelling, "Shut up!" And so it's nice to have a friendlier way.
So the buzzer is
Or more subtle.
Yeah.
a little more subtle.
Well, the question really is, how did we get the special session done with, I would say there were really two parts. One was the bargaining and the other one was the votes of the actual session. And in leading up to that, we had a lot of meetings where I think, to his credit, the governor's stamina was very commended because he wouldn't let us not have a deal. And then I think, the speaker and I, often deferring to the stature and representative aristocracy of the Senate, as they kept reminding us, we're senators, you guys are representatives. But as the speaker and I negotiated, at a certain point, I said to her on the phone, we're acting like a divorced couple arguing over our kid. And what we really, through that very frank conversation, is got to the point where we realized that, if it's both of ours production, this special session deal, then we have an obligation to see it through. And for me, as being the less equal of the equals, it is important to have ownership in it. And frankly, we've talked a lot about being bipartisan here, and that's important. Of course, one political party, runs the state, and so it has complete control of the legislature. So when you're in that environment and you're advocating the interests of the minority party, it helps when the speaker and the president and the governor accept that what you would like to see get accomplished. And once that began, I think we had a pathway to success because then everyone had ownership. And frankly, getting the votes was a lot tougher, I think, on the speaker than it was on me, because at the end of the day, she had the majority. And so it's tough sometimes to have to twist arms. But I'm curious, as you are, on how she twisted them all, but she hasn't shared that with me. Maybe you might share that with us today. That'd be good.
Did you want to answer him?
I think what I'll just share is the favor, was a 3-day session, but it felt a lot longer. And the night before the last day, we were in my offices, Mike and I, drinking some whiskey and counting votes. So that's how it gets done, if you really want to know.
That's great.
It got easier.
Okay. The theme of the summit is what's next. And the goals of the Oregon Business Plan are to create jobs, increase income, and reduce poverty. So what do we need to do next to accomplish those goals? And we're going to start with Speaker Kotek.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, one of the things I didn't mention that we did during session that we still need to do is build that bridge. And I want to thank everyone here in this room for their support. I, frankly, lose sleep over the idea that that bridge, that drawbridge, is going to get stuck. Earthquakes would be a lot worse, but that drawbridge can get stuck in midair, and we would be all in a very difficult situation. So we need to come back in February and work on that bridge. I'm looking forward to working with everyone here at the table to figure out how we can make this work for the state, and Oregon-led by-state project is absolutely essential. I want to also commend the folks here in the room and the people who have planned today. To see the addition of a poverty reduction goal is really heartening. I've spent 10 plus years in the state working on those issues for low-income Oregonians. I would hesitate to say, though, to the idea of going from 17% poverty to 10% in approximately 5 years is an ambitious goal. I hope that folks in this room don't think it's just aspirational. It's accomplishable, but it's going to be tough, and it's going to mean all of us working together and actually being honest about the fact that we have far too many Oregonians in the state who aren't equally sharing in the prosperity that we've been talking about all day today. And I would argue, whether it's my district in North Portland or the good folks in Crook County and Mike's district, we all want a path to prosperity. We want good schools. We want everyone to get ahead. We all benefit when the gap between the very well-off incomes in this household households in the state are not as far away from those in our districts that are struggling. So I hope we can work on that together. And then I think the last issue for me, we talk a lot about K-12 investments in higher ed, all very good. I'm really hoping in the next couple of years we're going to have a very robust conversation of that first 1,000 days of a child's life here in the state of Oregon. How do we make sure that the brain development of every child born in Oregon is nurtured and supported so when they do enter school, they're going to be ready to learn and ready to succeed. And I think it's about time that we actually put more into the 0 to 6 and particularly 0 to 2 spectrum of services here in the state, because that is why we're going to change the face of Oregon the next 15 years. If those children are ready to learn because they've had the first 2 years of their life really helping them have the best brain development they could possibly have. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative McLane, how would you answer that question?
Well, the goals that we are here talking about have, of course, residents and all of us, whether you live in the urban area or represent a very rural district like I do. One thing's for sure. I think it's an old adage that if you can't trust the messenger, it's hard to trust the message. And since we just accomplished a special session and have worked very hard on the previous goals, which was, build the bridge, invest widely in education and fix PERS, that if we can't stick to our bargains previously, and it's going to be hard to form a coalition of the willing, so to speak, to bring the necessary changes to accomplish the goals. So I just want to start with that way. We did a lot in the special session, and it includes a tax cut for small businesses. If in 2014 we try to roll that back, we're going to lose the credibility to do some of the things that we want to accomplish in the business plan. Second of all, what I value highly is water supply. You can't have prosperity. You can't have economic development. You can't have agriculture as robust without water supply. We've begun down the road, Senate Bill 839. It seems to me that the way to accomplish is we have to have water supply initiatives. We also have to have an understanding that one size doesn't fit all with our land use system. The soils and the topography in my district are very different than the Willamette Valley. And we're going to have to find some way to fast-track industrial lands in rural areas. And then finally, I think, the tax structure is clear that people want to have a discussion about it. But when there is demonization of an opponent, that often happens when we talk taxes, whether it's on the right or the left, we won't get accomplished what we want to accomplish. So if we talk about a capital gains tax cut and then we're beat up for, favoring the rich, well, then we're not going to have a diverse and robust discussion. So we're going to have to lay aside some of the elbows and really move forward to talk about tax structure because it matters. And that is the key to prosperity. That will lower, of course, the poverty rate when people can work.
Thank you. Senator Ferrioli.
Thanks. In order to answer that question from my perspective, you have to understand that District 30 is all or part of 11 counties, 36,000 square miles, very rural, remote even. Some of it doesn't rise to the population level that would meet the definition of frontier at the federal level. That is a place where people are natural resource dependent. So if I was to answer the question, what's next, it would be in this way. I would invite the people from the greater metropolitan area to take a greater self-interest in the natural resource sectors where Oregon is a top producer. And I say that you should be interested, self-interested in those sectors because the grain that's produced by tremendously energetic wheat industry flows through Portland. We're a great exporter of beef, all kinds of other agricultural commodities, and we're leaders in the world in many markets. These have the potential to provide even more economic benefit, and the more benefit that is derived from those basic industries, the fewer dollars have to flow from urban areas to schools and to subsidized services, the more dollars that are available to recirculate in our economy. So there is a direct self-interest. You know, there's a continuing debate over how much and where to harvest timber. It seems like that debate will continue through our lifetimes. But there is a question that we could answer that would improve and increase the potential in rural communities. Currently, it's still legal to export roundwood from private land. And as soon as you start to raise the issue about banning a log export from private land, you activate national interests and you activate land rights issues, and you end up in the same gridlock that you would with all of the other forestry management issues. But there is a way that we could provide incentives to log sellers to make it as profitable or more profitable to sell their logs into domestic markets than it would be to export. And that would involve a direct intervention in that market with incentives and subsidies and perhaps tax credits for producers who sell their roundwood into local markets. There also should be some incentives for local mills to produce the kind of commodities that Asian markets will absorb and have been very interested in purchasing. So at some point in time, instead of a ban which creates a backlash, using our ability to provide directed incentives and tax increment financing, the growth in employment that would be created by the increase in jobs from milling more roundwood in Oregon could be used to pay for those incentives. So there are mechanisms that we could use, although they don't directly attack the issues that have been so insoluble with forest management. They do incent the market to produce more and better opportunities for local communities in Oregon. Likewise, we could do a lot more with water management, but we should be looking at incentives for grass-fed beef production, dryland wheat farming, certainly more irrigation in the Columbia Basin. And by use of that same tax increment model, we can pay for the incentives and create the opportunity without putting an undue burden on the taxpayer and local communities. We have within our grasp today the potential for water storage in Idaho, Washington, and other areas in the Columbia River Basin that would allow us to use the storage capacity not only to provide irrigation, but during the other critical seasons of the year for salmon habitat and migration to add more in-stream water. Those solutions are available to us. They're available now. And largely, they depend on the attitudes and the will and the interests of urban Oregonians. If urban Oregonians understand the benefits that can flow from their self-interest in these basic industries and the products and the productivity that they provide, there really are no limits on what we could do to increase the stability and sustainability of not only the environment, but rural communities. What's interesting to me is that because of your numbers and your political power, you hold the key to unlock natural resource production in rural Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you. So, President Courtney?
Well, everything has been said that I could say, so it's just great that you all took so long. First of all, I find it interesting, the issues of jobs is, because we're struggling, we don't have enough jobs, but then when we get jobs, they're not family wage jobs, but then if they are family wage jobs, we don't have an educated population that can get into the jobs. So this thing is messed up. We did hold another special session, you may have forgotten, to save Nike. And apparently we did a pretty good job of it. And I hear last week, when I wasn't here, I was out of state, the governor announced that yet another big company up here is taking advantage of that. That Nike thing needs to go statewide. I think Senator Ferrioli and Representative McLane is right. This family wage thing is no joking matter. You can create jobs, but we got to get real about the family wage part of it. I don't want to hear middle income. I don't like middle income. I don't even know what middle income is. I think I know what family wage is. And you got to drive this discussion from this summit, which is a remarkable summit, which is always held here. You got to drive it statewide, and that is very important. But that's just really one last thing. You know, I was reading an editorial recently in another state on the eve of Pearl Harbor, and they said after that great generation, they were a great generation because they saved the world, but they did something else. They made sure that my generation, Peter, Michael, Coleman, Courtney, had his shot at a much better life than they had. I'm not going to go into what my parents did. But then the editorial went on and said, my generation has failed miserably. $30,000 is the average debt now of students coming out of college. Now, I'm just going to tell you, at Western, where I teach some classes with Western Oregon University, I tell my students, you will graduate with 3.5, and you're going to graduate school. And you ought to see the reaction. They're dumbfounded. I have to now have changed on two things. The state treasurer, Ted Wheeler, has a ballot measure authorizing the sale of bonds. He wants to go up to $1 billion for a fund to at least be able to pay for tuition for students in this great state, providing they get out of a high school, pretty good GPA. The good Senator Mark Hass would like to at least start with the first 2 years in community colleges. Unless we're willing to do something that dramatically and bold, we will never put together this family wage jobs, being prepared for jobs in the jobs market. You cannot continue, and you didn't have to clap for me because you clapped for them. That's the only reason you did it. The fact is, this is serious stuff. This is serious, serious stuff. The attitude of the greatest generation has to come here now. You cannot mess with this stuff anymore. You can't say there's access when there's not affordability. And so that kind of dramatic, it's going to cost money. Suck it up. If you want to help your economy and you want to make sure your children and the children of your children have got their shot, that's the kind of sacrifice the generation's got to make. And so I would say simply that we can do it because Oregon can do it if anybody can do it. But that special session we held at Nike, that's great. It's got to go statewide. But more importantly, we got to be willing to take, in my opinion, the boldest of bold steps nationwide in funding higher education, graduate schools, not just for scientists, but across the line. We need them in business, we need them in law, we need them in public administration, and of course we need them in natural and physical sciences.
Thank you. So our last question, last formal question, is more of an exercise. And to warn you, Senator Ferrioli, we're going to start with you. But it's kind of like swapping seats. And at first I was thinking of Tina could become Peter, Peter could become Tina, and then I went, no. But you're in the same party. So this is actually about your colleagues across the aisle. So I'd like you each to think about the issues your colleagues on the other side of the aisle are up against. And if you could tell us what strategies you might use to create more bipartisan solutions, how would you, in your mind, as your colleague across the aisle, accomplish the priorities that need to get done that they might care about, as well as your own? So.
Well, thank you for the question and allowing me the opportunity to lead off. It isn't very difficult for me, and I think probably it isn't very difficult for my other colleagues here to put ourselves in their shoes, in the other person's shoes. People believe, for whatever reason, that in caucuses you have a monolithic mind, or that there is some magical mechanism for controlling people, that all you need to do is express the desired objective and people line up to help you get to that objective. And that view is a bit comical, and anybody that's been in a caucus or in any kind of a group that has dynamics where people have full franchise, you know, they don't need anybody's permission, and for gosh sakes, if you think somebody needs permission to be a senator, you haven't met them. I can assume that that's also true for state representatives. Some of us on election thought we were anointed and not elected. But I will tell you that herding cats doesn't even begin to describe the processes, the internal issues, the dialogues, the massage, the transactional politics that goes on. And I think that's true. All I can tell you is that from my perspective, it must be much harder in the Democrat caucus than it is in the Republican caucus, because I hear the shouting outside the doors. And I guess that might be true in the House caucuses as well. So how to make that work? I think most people in this room would be amazed, possibly, by how much empathy there is among the current crop of legislative leaders for the difficulty of the task that they do every day. Trying to get an agenda together, trying to get people lined up behind an agenda, realizing that, of any group of people, in my case it's 14, there are 14 active candidates for the Senate president at all times. There are 14 active candidates for the caucus leader at all times, and everybody has a better idea, just ask them. But at the end of the day, I think those are the same challenges that our other colleagues, our other caucus leaders, and our other chamber leaders also face. And being in the room where you can have a candid conversation with people that are facing the same challenges across, believe it or not, the same political spectrum, makes it possible for us to empathize in ways that I think you would find gratifying and heartening if you could see those kinds of transactions. So the challenge for me is just to realize anything that I'm facing and any difficulty that I have, I've got at least 3 other people that know exactly what I'm up against. And if given a chance, will occasionally, and sometimes more often than not, offer the kind of help we need, the specific help that we need to get problems solved. And they may be little problems, but what you find out is it's the little problems that sink you, not the big ones. So it isn't as hard as some people might think. There's a lot of empathy that I can draw on among the 4 caucuses. We're all essentially doing the same job. And even though the president is very fond of the sports analogy, we got different shirts, different jerseys. At the end of the day, we're responsible to the same group of people for the success or failure of our actions, and that would be you.
Thank you. Speaker Kotek, I saw a lot of nodding going on there.
Yeah. Well, I agree with Senator Ferrioli. Those of us who are elected, the only other folks who at some point in time can understand what you're going through are other people who are elected and presiding officers or leadership. I mean, I've been to Mike's caucus a couple times. We all have similar pressures. They just come from different angles. We all have individuals back in our districts that want us to be going to the one end or the other end of the spectrum of issues. And so we actually do like each other. Most of the bills we pass in legislature pass unanimously or very close to it. So we actually do get a lot done together. But in terms of the actual, issues, I mean, I represent North and Northeast Portland. And I talked about the issues that we all share in all of our districts, jobs and education. So I think we find a lot of commonalities there. But there are parts of the state that certain issues are just, frankly, they are more important. The natural resource issues, the water issues. And when I was elected speaker on opening day, I talked a lot about One Oregon. I really do believe that. We are better as a whole if every community is succeeding and every community has what it needs to create jobs and support their communities. We spent a lot of time in this regular session this year working on water policy. Actually, some very significant bills were passed around water policy. We re-upped the budget for the Water Resources Department. They're contentious issues, but I think those of us who aren't as dependent on the water issues do understand how important it is to someone who's representing most of the eastern side of the state. In terms of the timber industries and the natural resource discussion, I will have some staff, I believe, at the breakout today on natural resources and rural prosperity. I think that's a very important discussion. And I'm going to say right here and now that I look forward to partnering with Senator Ferrioli on the idea of incentivizing logs that come off our private lands to get milled here in Oregon, to try to support specialized milling so the Japanese products can go over fully milled and over to countries in Asia. We have had successful companies here doing that. We need to do more of that. Now the question is how you do that. We talk about incentives. Incentives, i.e., cost money. And I'm not opposed to that, but I think it's about priorities, getting back to my opening statements, making those tough choices, prioritizing. Let me give you an example. there were differing opinions on the small business tax break that we passed. And while I made the deal to make sure we passed that, that was very important. However, if someone came in and said, maybe we need to tweak that a little bit because we could use $5 million of that small business tax break to incentivize companies to mill their logs in Oregon instead of sending them overseas, and we should talk about that. Those are the choices we deal with every day. There is no magic pot of money, and there are no magic dollars to create new incentives. But we make choices in the limited dollars we have. We try to use them wisely. And of course, the larger issue around tax reform that Mike mentioned, tax issues in different parts of the state, there's some things, there are a lot of commonalities, and then there are differences. So that debate has to be robust, and I think we should have very good debates in this state. I don't think we should shy away from ideological confrontation. However, at the end of the day, we have to solve the problem, and I think that's what you saw in the special session, and I think is we think as one state and we look at the issues that matter, I think we can actually solve some problems, and you have 4 people up here who have done that, and I assume we'll be doing it next year and the year after that.
Just a quick follow-on question for you, Speaker Kotek. In the special session in particular, but the other as well, the regular session, what was probably the hardest topic, issue, where your colleague across the aisle was in a different place than you, and how did you handle that? How did you get to an empathetic place?
Well, we had a lot of successes. In terms of things that we didn't agree on,
She's looking to her right.
I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, let's look at the water policy issues. We passed a bill that we ended up tapping into the expertise of individuals in our caucuses who could really work on that. And you had, someone like Senator Jackie Dingfelder from the Portland area, and you had Representative Cliff Benz from Ontario working on water issues. They did not agree. However, we passed a significant bill to move forward on some very technical issues going forward. So, my office and my goal was to try to find common ground somewhere on every issue. And other issues that we couldn't find common ground, frankly, didn't come up to the floor for a vote.
Okay, thank you. Senator Ferrioli.
Yes?
Oh, I'm sorry, you already answered. One time. Representative McLane. Sorry about that.
Thank you. The question, I'm supposed to put myself in Speaker Kotek's shoes and talk about how I would accomplish her priorities. Is that the question? Because the whole time I was thinking, Speaker McLane.
Speaker McLane. It's got a ring to it.
But Speaker Kotek, well, that's different. We did have a great moment in the special session when the speaker said to me at a pivotal moment and said, that sounds like a problem. I said, Madam Speaker, my problems are now your problems. We have a problem. So we did actually have some experience about trying to figure out how to solve problems in each other's caucuses with regards to getting votes. And we do have a common, experience in, because ultimately, if you have to get something done, you have to figure out passage that builds votes with people who don't represent a district that looks like yours, nor naturally share the same priorities. And I think the speaker and I have worked hard at that. I know that it's not been easy. One time at Mahonia Hall, the speaker and Amy's anniversary, she was late for her anniversary dinner, and finally said, I'm done, I gotta leave. And so I think, we both share sacrifices that we have to make sometimes with our families, and knowing that it's a tenuous coalition. One thing I would say is if I was Speaker Kotek for a moment, and I wanted to get the bridge done, I would make my best friend Cliff Benz from Ontario, and I would see if Cliff could work his magic yet again. And then second of all, I would make sure that Washington State was involved in producing a consensus structure. And if that means sitting down with the opposition in Washington and working through their objections and building a consensus bridge, then that's how I'd get the bridge done. Because ultimately, often I think the speaker has the task of trying to put together these packages of 31 votes without creating alienation that will then lead to rejection of other ideas just for the sake of being problematic. She is naturally inclined to do that by her personality, and so I would recommend, to get your priorities done, that you do make Cliff and then the opposition party in Washington a priority to listen to get the bridge done. Finally, I'd say this. You know, when it comes to the poverty initiative, the speaker mentioned that that's an ambitious goal. It is. Her and I share advocation for hunger. We both sponsored a bill for heat relief, and because ultimately, in order to have buy-in for representative government, people have to have food and they have to have shelter. If you can't create an atmosphere where people believe that they can get the basics, then you can't really maintain representative government. And so I know your personal goals are that. I share them. And one of the things that I would do is I would try to make sure that the folks who oppose some of the initiatives for spending money, the choices, as you said, I think the speaker had emphasized that the money that we have has many more hands than money, and that we're going to have to solve a math problem. And so ultimately, we have to get some buy-in from the public employee unions on what the goals are. Because if they will agree to the goals, then I think we can get something done. If they won't agree to the goals that we've laid out here today, it's going to be a few years for the speaker and others who have to basically answer to that political force, which is a difficult force.
Mm-hmm. Last but not least,
is there any time left? Is it all gone or what?
We
we
have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. You know, I'm really upset. I wanted to tell you the 4 areas that we nearly lost the special session, because we nearly blew it. And I thought you'd be interested in that. But Leah doesn't want to talk about that. We won't talk about it.
Oh, feel free.
All right, number 2. If you want to know, this is it. You got to love the legislature. And most legislators don't. You've got to really consider it a high honor to be in the legislative branch of government and want to make it the best you can best for us to be able to break through on some of this stuff. And I'm made fun of all the time. I've been around so long. You love the legislature. Oh, Peter loves the legislature. You know what? I do. That's all I am. And I just think that's very important to this. Because I know most of you probably don't even like us. But just imagine the world without the legislature. If you think your lives would be easier, think about the word dictatorship, kings and royalties and all that stuff. So you got to love the institution. And Oregon's institution is as good as it gets. When they put it together, they did a beautiful job. Number 2. No. I've taken up my time. You got to do the little things. You got to do those everyday little things. When Senator Ferrioli came up to me on a podium moments after a major vote was taken on that special session package, an individual had changed his vote. He didn't have to change his vote. He said, Peter, do you know, blah, blah, blah. I said, I'll see what I can do. Now, that's not a reflection on me. That's not a reflection on me or him. It's the everyday things. When you're fighting on the Senate floor, you don't go over the line. No trash talking, no cheap shots. You don't go over the line. It's called respect for the process. You can fight awful hard. You can really bring the boom, as they say in football. You don't have the cheap shots. You don't go over the line in the Senate chamber. The next thing is you got to be a giver. Never heard of that, have you? You got to be a giver. I didn't know I was a giver until 4 years ago. And my wife said, yeah, you're a giver. Now, you're going to say I'm weak. I give. The idea is outmaneuver, beat the other guy. Your instincts, initially, if you're going to be in this business, Yeah, and they'll pick it up. Give. Can I give? Can I help? I'm not a good guy. I'm not none of that malarkey. We're not talking about that. Instinctively, you got to be a giver. The last thing, this panel is so incomplete, it's unbelievable. When they put it together, there should be 4 more people up here. Chief of staffs. If you want to know the truth, how that special session happened, Senator Ferrioli would say to me, take Jonathan and Phil and get them in a room, let them happen. Phil Bentley, my chief of staff, Jonathan Thompson, his chief of staff, and Tina and Mike's chief of staff, I'm going to tell you, if you know the role that they play in that special session, you would be stunned. We all were out there. We were all saying it's about us, but I will tell you something. You don't do this business. You don't get close without rock stars. And I'm going to tell you something about my people I hire. Every one of them leaves me after years. And my wife said, nobody ever leaves me easy. I won't let them go easy. They kill me. They break my heart. I don't want anybody to ever leave me. But you know what? The only reason I'm here today is because of them. And the only reason we did what we did in September, December, or the session, these staff. So there should be 4 more people up here. That's the best I can give you on how you get this business done. And also, unfortunately, I can't tell you how we nearly blew it.
So I'm torn between getting Phil Bentley up here and interviewing him about you, or finding out if you really answered that question. Just kidding. We have 1 minute left. If looks could kill, I would be dead right now. 1 minute left. Anyone want to say something?
Madam Moderator, I'd just like to share a comment that Michael Martin, Peter Murphy, Courtney said. I didn't get that right, did I? Michael Martin, Aloysius, Peter, Courtney said during a tense moment, I think all of us were present, we were all challenging each other in the most direct way to invest personal political capital in outcomes. And it's terrifying, and it's dangerous politically, and it's taxing. And we asked about principles, and we looked at the president and said, what about the principles that are at stake here? And the president looked us in the eye and said, sometimes we have to rise above our principles.
And on that note, I want to thank all of you for your time today, but most importantly for your leadership, your hard work, your service. You are making us look good as a state, so thank you very much. Thank you. And I need to follow direction. You have to say goodbye to me. Bye. Chris Coleman asked me.
I got less time than you're going to use.
Oh, dear. He said he got less time than everybody else. Chris asked me to introduce John Carter, and he told me I could not say, here's Johnny. So I'm not. John Carter.
Thanks.
Always a rodeo.